This session is being recorded for reference and sharing purposes. CPD is crucial for structural engineers as it ensures they remain up to date with evolving industry standards, technology, and regulations. With the introduction of the Building Safety Act 2022, structural engineers must stay informed about new safety protocol, risk management practice, and legal responsibilities. The legislation places a strong emphasis on the accountability, transparency, and compliance with safety standards, particularly for high-rise residential buildings. It introduced new requirements for risk assessment, increased scrutiny of building design, and heightened responsibility throughout the building's life cycle. This legislation will help to shape how we approach building safety, requiring a more rigorous, collaborative, and accountable approach in our practice. This CPD series are prepared and presented by the structural engineers within the Southeastern Super Region in the UK and headquarter, comprising 4 hubs as annotated on the map. The light purple area on this map shows where we are, who we are, and how we can support our members. For help and support on technical matters, CPD's webinars, training, courses, and many more, please visit the institution website and contact HQ if you need any assistance. For those who would like to watch the first session, it is uploaded and available on the institutional website's YouTube channel. The second one is under the review and will be uploaded shortly. Please note the topics and dates that will be presented in due course. Please book your place soon as the number of attendees is limited. Please send question via text message box, which will be answered either during or after the session. Without further delay, I hand over to Callum to introduce himself and share his presentation. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Callum. So today we'll be talking about the Golden Thread, the creation of which is one of the requirements for the Building Safety Act. Before we start, can we do a quick poll? There are a few questions to ask. So the first question is, I understand what the Golden Thread is and what needs to be included. The second is PDFs are a compatible file type for the Golden Thread. What calculation outputs need to be included in the Golden Thread? So none, all of them, or some of them. And the Golden Thread needs to be updated either whenever any work is carried out, only when any major works are carried out, or only when the building owner wishes it to do so. So if you can all sort of fill out that poll as we do the presentation. Otherwise, jump in. So the introduction of the Golden Thread is a response to the Grenfell Tower tragedy and its subsequent independent review led by Dame Judith Hackett. The Golden Thread is a key element of the Building Safety Act, which is being introduced to improve building safety standards. In an emergency, the Golden Thread contains readily available information, including building layouts, system details, and safety features, allowing emergency services to act swiftly and effectively. Before we dive into what the Golden Thread actually is, it's important to start with what it is not. First, even though it's formally submitted for the first time at Gateway 2, the legislation makes it clear the Golden Thread should be created from the start of the project. It's not just something pulled together later. Second, there's a common misconception that the Golden Thread is just a copy of the health and safety file. It's not. They serve very different purposes, and we'll explore that shortly. So you might be asking, is the Golden Thread a principle, a process, or a database? Well, to meet the goals of the legislation, it has to be all three. It's a principle because it sets out expectations for safety and accountability. It's a process because it guides how information is created, maintained, and verified. And it's a database because ultimately the information has to be stored in a way that's structured, accessible, and reliable throughout the life of the building. Now, the golden thread must be created for all higher risk buildings during design and construction. A higher risk building is defined as being at least 18 meters tall or having 7 or more stories. It must be one of the following: a building with 2 or more residential units, a care home, or a hospital. It's important to remember that only residential buildings are required to maintain the golden thread during occupation. For a new higher risk building, the golden thread should be created right at the start of the design. It then becomes the single source of truth for all building safety information, and it stays with the building throughout its entire life. Importantly, the golden thread should only be deleted when the building is demolished. The golden thread isn't just for new builds. It also applies to existing higher risk buildings already in occupation. This means that we'll need to go back and gather historic information like as-built drawings, past surveys, and safety case reports to create the golden thread database. It's not enough to scan the information in as a PDF. It must be in a golden thread compatible format. Now, it's understood that some information may be missing or simply unknown. That's okay, but in those cases, a documented plan must be created to explain how you'll find or recreate that information. That plan should then be gradually implemented with the missing data added to the golden thread over time. During the design phase, the principal designer is responsible for creating, developing, managing, updating, and finalizing the golden thread. During construction, that responsibility shifts to the principal contractor, who must manage, update, and finalize the golden thread for that phase. However, collaboration is key. The principal designer should continue working with the contractor to make sure any design work carried out during construction is properly captured. It's really important to clarify who holds which role when you join a project. If you're not careful, you could inadvertently take on legal responsibilities tied to one of these roles. But for most structural engineers, you'll be a duty holder, which means you'll be responsible for providing and updating information related to the structure throughout the project. So there are 9 core principles that underpin the golden thread. And today I'm going to focus mainly on how we can make it simple and understandable, because that's the key to getting it right in practice. Along the way, I'll touch on 4 other principles that are especially relevant to design and construction. Just to note, we'll be publishing new guidance soon that goes through all 9 principles and explains how the legislation applies to different building types in more detail. I won't go through the full wording of every principle, but this first one essentially boils down to one key point. The information in the golden thread must be accurate, up to date, and checked to confirm that it's both. For structural engineers, that means simply handing over final design information at the end of a project isn't enough. The golden thread must include the actual as-built information, because that's what future decisions will be based on. The 9th principle of the golden thread also requires that information must be stored in an open data format and align with the principles of interoperability. So what does that mean? It's simply put, the information must be structured so that it can be easily understood by different people using different software. In terms of data formats, we can divide it into 3 main categories. Sort of structured data, that's highly hierarchical and easy for computers to process, but it is harder for people to understand. So examples of this could be IFC, JSON, or XML files. Then we have semi-structured data. This is much more user-friendly, readable by both people and computers. So examples of this are CSV or TSV files, but could even be considered to include DXF files. Unstructured data, this is data we often find in sort of text files or images like PNG, which are easier for people to understand, but it's much harder for a computer to interpret. PDFs are inherently not compliant and should not be relied on as the main mechanism for managing information in the Golden Thread. They are not a substitute for structured, open, editable, and linked data formats, but they can be part of the record keeping. And I'll talk a little bit about how PDFs can be used to supplement the Golden Thread throughout the presentation. The Golden Thread needs to be simple and accessible. This means that it should be organized in a way so that the right people can easily find the information when they need it most, whether that's during construction, maintenance, or an emergency. It should also help the owners understand how they can modify the building, ensuring ease of use at every stage of the building's life. To understand the difference between the Golden Thread and the health and safety file, remember that the Golden Thread is the live information you need to act, whereas the health and safety file is the story you need to understand why. The Golden Thread is dynamic, current, and action focused. It's used to make decisions in real time. The health and safety file is static and retrospective. It's used to understand the context and reasoning. So to use an analogy, and given that it's sort of lunchtime, let's think of it like sort of food. The Golden Thread is the nutritional information on the back of a food package. It's the live information you need to make informed decisions, like knowing allergen content, calories, or ingredient. As a consumer, you can use this to make safe choices. If you're a qualified professional, say a chef, you could use it to recreate the dish, but it doesn't tell you the how behind it. On the other hand, the health and safety file is more like a recipe book. It explains why certain ingredients were used, the history of the dish, how it was prepared, how to recreate it exactly. It's more detailed and narrative driven, which helps you understand the rationale behind the decisions. So what exactly needs to be included in the Golden Thread? It should store key building information, as-built details, and compliance evidence. This is the core data that ensures that the building's safety and integrity over time. Items like competence declarations, building control submissions, safety case reports should be kept in the health and safety file. This is information that can be in PDFs as it should remain static, but they should also be referenced into the Golden Thread with important information extracted and summarized. This way, people can easily find the information when they need it. When comparing what information goes into the Golden Thread versus the health and safety file, there are a few key distinctions. For example, compliance, both need to capture compliance information, but the Golden Thread only requires a short confirmation and a short statement or reference to the actual compliance document. For residual hazards, if there are any residual hazards, the Golden Thread should include a statement that clearly describes the hazards for the emergency services to understand and act quickly in an emergency. Key building and as-built information, this should be stored in the Golden Thread, but in a way that the intended user can easily understand. There's a common misconception that structural calculations need to go into the Golden Thread. This isn't the case. What you need to provide is the information a structural engineer would need to recreate the calculations. The actual calculations themselves don't need to be in the Golden Thread, but you can reference where they're stored in the health and safety file. So how do you know what should be included in the Golden Thread? So a good general sort of set of rules of thumb is if the information can be derived or easily calculated later, it probably doesn't need to be included in the Golden Thread. However, there are a few exceptions to this rule. For example, if the emergency services need this information, or if it's necessary to maintain the building, or if it could only be obtained in the future through on-site measurements, testing, non-destructive or destructive. These types of information should be included as they might not be easily accessible later and are critical for the safety and maintenance. For example, let's consider a concrete column. So what would the emergency services need to know? They'd need to know if it's structural, they need to know if it's fire resistant, if it is fire resistant, what the fire rating is, and what the sort of movement limit is before it becomes a concern. Building managers might need to know, does it need a protective coating? When does the coating need to be replaced? Or has the element been inspected? If so, when? Are there any signs of, for example, cracking? And what are the recommended repairs? An engineer would need to know sort of geometric properties like height, width, and length, or material properties, sort of like grade, concrete grade, the additives added, or the reinforcement details. This helps ensure all relevant information is captured, tailored to who will use it and when. As a simple example of what should be included in the golden thread, let's say you need to calculate the deflection of a beam. While there are many variables that would typically be considered, in this case, let's focus on the maximum allowable deflection. The building manager doesn't need to know all the detailed calculations. They only need to know the maximum allowable deflection to ensure the beam is performing safely. This type of information should be included into the golden thread as it's important for the building's performance and safety. But if the maximum deflection is exceeded, it can become safety critical and needs to be known by the emergency services. Another example of this could be the fire rating of an element. In contrast, some information cannot be easily derived and must be included in the golden thread, such as the depth of the structural element, the spacing of beams or support, the maximum floor loading. This information is essential because it provides immediate insight into the building's design, and it can't be calculated on the spot when it's needed. It's important to remember, though, that things like the sort of second moment of area or the loading conditions can be calculated by an engineer when they're needed from that existing information, and therefore it's also not safety critical or required for the building's maintenance. Therefore, it should not be included in the golden thread. So that's what to include, but let's move on to the practical side of how to include information in the golden thread. And we've tried to simplify this into a basic flow process. So if the information can easily be understood with a simple description, then we're recommending that the best approach is to add it as metadata, so your BIM model, provided you can save it in an IFC or CSV format. This works well for capturing basic details about simpler elements. If the element is more complicated but can easily be represented with 2D drawings, then we recommend that these drawings be saved in a DXF file and referenced in the model. If the element is complex and requires a 3D model to be fully understood, then it should be saved in the IFC format and created as a local model for that element. Understandable and easy to update, ensuring compliance around. To give you a sort of clearer picture, let's apply this process to a structural element, in this case, the column we looked at previously. The column information could largely be captured as simple metadata in the BIM model. This includes its dimensions, material properties, and basic safety features. The slab that it's connected to, however, is a lot more complex. Most of the information can be included as metadata, but since the reinforcement within the slab varies along its length, this requires more detail than can easily be stored in the BIM model. So 2D DXF drawings can be included as a supplement for clarity. The pile cap, in this case, at the base of the column may require a separate model for the geometry, especially if it has a particularly unique reinforcement arrangement that needs to be understood in 3D. In this case, we'd recommend saving it in the IFC format again. And this is to accurately represent its complexity. This approach helps ensure that every element is represented in the most efficient and understandable way based on its complexity and the information needed. If you use DXF files or a local IFC model, it's important to remember that you still need to apply the metadata to the main model, especially that information which is safety critical. This approach should only be used to supplement the model with additional information. Another example could be for sections of steel or aluminium elements. It's important to capture information, the standard for sort of, say, standard historic sections can be hard to look up, but if you have metadata that lets you know, for example, that it's a PFC and provides you with the dimensions, you can work out the rest. Sometimes it can be hard to capture this information as metadata. Aluminium sections, for example, can often be complex. In this case, it's easier to represent the section information as a DXF file and reference that. If you have a sort of more complex, custom fabricated steel element, you should try and capture that geometry in a local model, which has a higher level of detail to the global, capturing the information needed for a future engineer to undertake an analysis of that element. Just a reminder, though, that it's not only design information that needs to be included in the golden thread. According to the legislation, information about the last inspection must also be included. That includes when an inspection is carried out. The previous inspection information must be removed from the golden thread to keep it up to date. This is different from the health and safety file, where inspection information is added but not replaced. So for each inspection should capture the following: details of the person undertaking the inspection, repairs needed or identified during the inspection, and a confirmation that any previous repairs have been carried out. This ensures that the golden thread is live, accurate record of the building's condition and maintenance history. So this brings us to an important point: when to update the golden thread. According to the legislation, the golden thread must always be kept up to date. Simply put, the golden thread should never be out of date. It's not just about adding new information, it's about ensuring that outdated or irrelevant details are removed as needed. For example, when changes occur, whether it's a new design stage, inspection, or any modification to the building, it should be updated immediately. This ensures that the golden thread remains accurate and provides the most reliable real-time data. The golden thread is fundamentally about ensuring accountability at every stage of the building's life cycle. For structural engineers, this means recording who signs off on the structural design. For individual elements, recording who designed it, who checked it. If the rules change at any point during the project, these records need to be updated. This is particularly important when using subcontractors or subconsultants. They should be recorded where relevant. It's not just about names and dates. You should also record competencies alongside this information to ensure accountability. While this largely builds on current practices, such as initialing drawings and calculations, the difference here is that this information is now stored in the golden thread, ensuring a clear, accessible record. I'll move on to a practical example. So while we've discussed capturing information into the IFC file, it's important to acknowledge the limitations of the current IFC format. The reality is that the current version of the IFC format doesn't fully support all the necessary data required for the golden thread. From a practical perspective, while the IFC format is being expanded to capture all this information, only the safety critical and maintenance information may end up being included directly. Text files can be used as a good substitute and reference for unstructured information. For example, inspection reports. In this case, we just reference it to the element ID. The information in the golden thread is just a concise summary of the issue, what it means, what repairs have been recommended, what repairs have been carried out. The full report, full inspection report, would sit in the health and safety file. Don't forget to include compliance. That could be a simple indicator that the element is compliant, or it could provide a short description of what the consequences are, so what's needed to be known, and provide a reference to the health and safety file for further information. But what's needed to be known is what the emergency services need to know, what the building manager needs to know. Where highly structured information is required, alternatives include sort of JSON files, where the information about, say, the materials can be provided in a hierarchical format. For those who've noticed the lack of units in this example, we're working on some guidance for what to include and what recommended units to use. The vast majority of information may be easier to store in CSV files. So this could include things like section properties. In this case, it just means you may need more files for the different section types, but unlike a JSON file, the information is structured in a way that's easier for most engineers to understand and edit. CSV files can also be used to store your references to the health and safety file, although it may be in some cases that they ask for this information to be included directly in the golden thread. We'd still suggest in this case that this information be kept as PDFs and reference, because this information should remain static. You would not want someone being able to alter your competence declaration, for example. And remember, you can supplement with DXF files. That does not mean you can simply submit all your drawings in a DXF format, because the text within it is not structured. DXF files should be used to provide additional geometric information, such as rebar layouts or unusual section profiles, but you must include any information that can be stored as metadata in a structured searchable format like IFC, JSON, or CSV. So slightly contradictory to the concept of staying with active, up-to-date information, there is an additional requirement to store information integral to the building's original as-built condition permanently within the golden thread. This is to ensure that future designers and stakeholders have access to the foundational data, facilitating informed decision-making and maintaining the building's structural integrity. If you're working on a building now and modifications are made in, say, 2027, 2050, and 2055, whenever the golden thread is updated, anything about those modifications that is no longer relevant gets removed. Anything that remains relevant stays within the golden thread. However, alongside the most up-to-date current information, that original information that you put together, that stays with the golden thread for its entire lifetime. So resources, we've got some ISREC-T guidance coming out, so this will be published soon. It contains further information about the legislation, more practical examples of what to include and how to implement it. In addition to this, we're also working up a digital standard of the information to be included within the golden thread, which will be available on the ISREC-T website and contain common elements and material types. Additionally, goldenthread.co.uk offers some useful information about the definition and principles, and you can download a copy of the Golden Thread report. Other information can be found on the government's websites by looking at building safety campaign or keeping information about higher risk buildings.